Falcha, welcome back to Irish Granny Tarot, part 2 of the coverage of the book Surviving Death by Leslie Kean. Let's get right into it. We're starting chapter 4, The Old Me by Cindy Hammond, who was the mother of this child we're going to talk about. A little boy named Ryan Hammond, who started having memories and at the age of 5, horrible nightmares. His mother, Cindy, was an Oklahoma County clerk. His father was a cop. His father was gone to work at night. He worked the night shift. It's a song. She was really reluctant. His name was Kevin. She was really reluctant to tell Kevin. But Ryan was keeping her up all night long with nightmares while the dad was at work. But eventually, it became so bad that she had to say something, and he just freaked out. This is nonsense, you can imagine. But he loved his child, and he heard him out without shaming him, and the little boy showed the father a photograph of himself in his past life. And who was he? An actor. Now, before you think, oh sure, Napoleon, no. He was an extra, and he wasn't really an actor at all. He was the friend of an actor who let him be an extra in a couple of his movies, and he never had any lines. He just stood around. But he happened to get into a picture, and we're going to read about this, a photograph. Read about this. So how they discovered all this was his mother showing him a book of old movies just for fun, and he pointed to a picture one day of George Raft, the actor. And he goes, "Oh, that's George, my friend." So, the mother explained to Kevin, the dad, that I had been holding back for months. Ryan had told me one night he had a secret, and he was pretty sure it was a secret he wasn't supposed to tell. He knew that he used to be somebody else. He was once another person who was a movie star and lived in Hollywood. And he was rich, but not rich like, the emperor or something. He just was a wealthy businessman and had lived in a big house with a big swimming pool in the yard. It was a house that had been full of children. In fact, he'd had 3 boys, and he didn't think that they were his own biological boys, but he gave them his name because nobody else could. He had been in movies and had driven a green car. He went to fancy parties with the cowboy man, the guy who did the tricks with the horse. This man was his buddy and was also in the movie. The cowboy had also done all of those cigarette commercials. So, that was the old me. Did I read that properly? Make sure I read the right part. Yeah. So, this intrigued the mother, and without telling the dad, this is before she ever told him, she started checking books out of the library on old Hollywood, and they would just go through them and look at them. And one day, he saw the picture of the still from a black and white movie with George Raft and freaked out. That's George. That's my friend George. So they watched the movie, and he was an extra in the movie. He had no lines, and he got no credits. They eventually found out. It was very hard to find out who he was. So sometimes he relived being the guy in the former life. He wanted to dress like this old-timey guy. And so what he said he was an agent, and the parents didn't understand. When I read that, I went, oh, of course, he's an agent, the one who gets the actors the jobs. The parents thought he meant like a secret agent or a spy. And he always wanted to wear suits. They thought he was trying to be James Bond. So he claimed he had servants, that he would play act directing plays or movies. He knew all these show tunes. He would hum show tunes. Like, where did you learn that? He would try to tap dance. He wanted agent clothes, is what he called them, a suit and a tie and fedora. This is like a little kid. And he had these black glass frames, empty sunglass frames. He took the lenses out and insisted on wearing them all the time because he thought they made him look like an agent. Here he is with his glasses right here. Oh, this is that man, the kid who had the weird shaped head. So, one evening, the mother was getting Ryan ready for bed, and he said something to me I'll never forget. I told him, Ryan, do you know that you're not the man in the picture anymore? We just want you to be Ryan. And he said to me, Mom, you still don't get it, do you? I'm not the same as the man in the picture on the outside, but on the inside, I'm still that man. You just can't see on the inside what I see. Kevin and I were often struck by how much Ryan talked like an adult. Although we were used to it by now, he seemed to have wisdom that was somewhat uncanny for his age. So they got connected somehow with the Unexplained TV show. And the show said, oh, this is really interesting. Okay, so we'll research it for you. And they found the actor. His name was Marty Martin, and he was a Hollywood agent who was best friends with George Raft and a cowboy actor. And eventually, and he didn't really do movies, he was just in a couple as an extra for lark, for fun. But he was a prominent Hollywood agent. And his daughter was still alive, and they met up with her, and she confirmed everything. So, Chapter 5, 55 Verified Memories. So, the kid's mom kept detailed journals for Dr. Tucker. They got connected to Dr. Tucker, and they were able to verify 55 facts. But they discovered that Ryan did have psychic abilities. However, most of the verification that they were able to do came from Marty's daughter. And they had a very difficult time finding her. Nobody really knew she was alive, and they finally found her with the help of two obscure Hollywood archivists. Ryan knew Marty's real birth date. It was recorded wrong in public records, and he knew, and his daughter knew. Nobody else knew. So the question is, does consciousness depend on the brain, or is this some weird psychic thing going on? So we continue in that research. How do we know that all these so-called memories are really not a really psychic kid connecting to a living person's thoughts? So part 2, To Death and Back Again. And this starts with chapter 6 called The Shoe on the Ledge. And we begin with the story of Kimberly Sharp, who had a master's in social work and was employed at Harborview Hospital in Seattle. And her job was running interference for the medical staff when people had personal, emotional, or social issues. She was there to help people, kind of a free-floating counselor assistant type thing. So she met up with a patient in 1977. She was a young social worker at Harborview. She met a patient named Maria. Maria was a migrant worker who had come to the area to visit a friend and had a heart attack. And she flatlined. She was clinically dead, and then she was revived. And the staff called Kim in to help because Maria, when she was revived, was really agitated the next day. Of course, there was a language barrier, too. She told the story of what happened to her when she was clinically dead, of, a near-death experience, leaving her body, being on the ceiling, watching the CPR, could describe everything perfectly. She suddenly found herself no longer over her own body being revived, but at the emergency room entry where the ambulances came. And she was able to look down on several floors of the hospital at that side of the building and on the hospital's ambulance bay. About the third, fourth floor level. And she found herself looking, just kind of noticed, a window ledge. And on the window ledge, pushed up against the wall of the building, so completely out of sight from the ground, was a tennis shoe. And she described this tennis shoe in lots of detail. I won't go into it. And she was desperate to talk to Kimberly because she wanted Kimberly to go get the shoe to prove to everybody that she'd had this out-of-body experience, this near-death experience. Now, this is 1977. There wasn't a lot of talk about this at that time. So Kim agreed. Okay. So she went outside and she walked the perimeter of the building, and she could see nothing on any ledge. Because she wasn't able to see, the higher up it got, she couldn't see the ledges properly. So she went inside and did the perimeter of the third floor. And she began on the east side, she went to the north side, she went to the west side, and she found the shoe on the ledge. And she was so shocked that her knees got weak. She had to hold herself up against the window so she didn't pass out. And all she could think of was, how did this woman know that was there? So Kimberly ran through some possibilities. Did Maria, migrant worker in town for one day, she would have had to have gone half a mile from the hospital to the closest building tall enough to be able to see with binoculars to find that shoe. But the day that she came to Seattle and had the heart attack was the first time she'd ever been there. She would have had to unhook herself from her ICU cardiac care bed full of monitors and observation, etc., and wandered up to the third floor. And, she didn't. She was always observed in her bed, hooked up to all the machinery. She would have had to have somebody working with her in the most elaborate hoax in the history of the world that included having a heart attack. But she'd had no visitors at all. She didn't know anybody except one person in the city. So did the staff, somebody on the staff, conspire with her in some elaborate hoax? Nobody at the time spoke Spanish, and we didn't know her, so they didn't know how that would have happened. So the last explanation was this an out-of-body experience? Kim was shocked that Maria's description could only be seen from a point in empty space 3 floors above the ground. So the only way that you could have seen that from outside, you would have been floating 3 floors above the ground. It started to be called the Shroud of Turin of Harborview Hospital. And then Kim herself had a near-death experience in 1970. So she was predisposed to believe this woman. So chapter 7 talks about journeys out of the body. Out of a body experience is not proof of life after death. It indicates that our aware mind exists and it can function independently of the brain and the physical body, but that doesn't mean that there's life after death. So you have to be rational about what you're looking at. Did Maria's detached consciousness depend on her living body to exist? Oh, what did I do? I wrote page 3, and that is absolutely wrong. But let's see here if I can. Here we go. The effect on consciousness may be, different during actual death. The conscious associated with a body that has not yet lost the potential to live may or may not be the same as the consciousness associated with the body that has lost that potential, writes this person from the University of North Texas who has been studying the truth of out-of-body experiences. So another potential explanation is that this experience was not an out-of-body experience, but some sort of clairvoyance, a psi experience. They may be imagery-rich manifestations of ESP. They're more vivid than dreams, and they're not forgotten the way dreams are. If people have an out-of-body experience, they remember them vividly, usually for the rest of their lives. And they often change people's lives, change the directions of their lives, and they frequently help to diminish the fear of death. They have much more impact than a normal old dream has. An out-of-body experience makes the idea of independent consciousness conceivable. There's some sort of awareness, and it's not connected that we know. At least it's not connected to the five senses. It challenges the idea that the source of the self and of experience is made by the brain, and it can't exist without the brain. This is kind of a Western notion, and this out-of-body experience challenges that. If consciousness can function apart from the reversibly dead body, perhaps it continues to function beyond irreversible death, writes Holden of this university. Unfortunately, we'll never be able to find proof due to the methodological failure of researchers to find reliable, irreversibly dead people to participate in their stories. In other words, once someone's dead, there's your conundrum. A person called Vicky Noratuck was blind from birth. And in 1973, at the age of 22, she got into a life-threatening car wreck. And she had an out-of-body experience. And during the out-of-body experience, she could see. And she didn't know what she was looking at because she'd never seen. And it freaked her out on multiple levels. There's a thing called the AWARE study. Awareness during resuscitation, and this is a study done at the Stony Brook University School of Medicine, and it was a multi-hospital study for 4 years. They studied 2,060 cardiac arrests, and it included 15 hospitals from the United States, the United Kingdom, and Austria. They had 101 patients. I thought I said 2,060 cases. Oh, that was the total number. Out of 2,060 cardiac arrests, they had 101 patients who had a near-death experience. Sorry. Out-of-body experiences are often associated with near-death experiences. But near-death experiences are considered more transmaterial journeys. So they reported that in 20% of the people, these are reported to happen in 20% of the people who are close to death globally. So 1 out of 5 people around the world who come very close to death, and it can be documented, will have one of these experiences. That's pretty high. Bruce Grayson, a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia, probably at the same place as Dr. Stevenson, is the world-leading near-death experience researcher. And in 2015, he wrote a paper, and he described this whole thing. Now, I don't know if we need to read this. Yeah, we don't really need to read this because this reiterates what we've already gone over in several different books. And so if you want a real analysis, blow by blow, of a near-death experience, go back and look at the books we've done on past life regression, near-death experience, out-of-body experience, reincarnation. Fascinating books. The present study that they did showed that near-death experience memories contained more characteristics than real event memories and coma memories. Thus, this suggests they cannot be considered as imagined event memories. On the contrary, their physiological origins can lead them to be really perceived, although not lived in the reality. So they're perceptions, but where are they coming from? And this that I just read is a quote from seven Belgian scientists who studied all this in 2013. Now, this is getting a lot of attention in serious scientific areas. So then we have the story of Pam Reynolds. She had what's called a giant basilar artery aneurysm. An aneurysm is like a balloon in a blood vessel, a weak spot that can pop. And she had one at the base of the brain. To get there, warning to those who are squeamish, to get there they took off your skull, including the roof of the eye. And by taking away the bone, you create a space that goes right down along the skull base, and it gets us to the area that we need to expose for the aneurysm. This is the doctor talking. You're going underneath the brain to get to this flaw in the blood vessel. We use hypothermic cardiac arrest to treat these very difficult aneurysms. For this technique, you lower the body temperature down to 60.8 Fahrenheit, 16 degrees centigrade for Canadians. You do that by hooking the patient up to a heart machine, which cools the temperature down until you get to that target temperature. The cardiac team inserts a catheter into the groin that goes up the artery, and another catheter which goes up the vein. You have a catheter on either side of the heart that takes over the functions of the heart. Then, for an hour, you can shut off that machine and basically drain the blood out of the body. Yet the patient is still resuscitatable. It's like when children fall into an icy lake. They can often save them from drowning even though they've been in there for an hour or whatever. Lower temperature sort of puts things in suspended animation. That's not technical, but that's basically what happens. Once they clip the aneurysm, the process is reversed. The pump's started up, the blood's pushed back in the body, and now instead of cold blood, they warm it up slowly, and gradually the body temperature comes back and the patient hopefully regains consciousness. Pam's whole body was extensively monitored. Her brain was monitored with an EEG electroencephalograph, which are brain waves, and with what are called evoked potentials. These are ways to make the nerves send very small signals to the brain, and normally you can average them out and get a strong signal. You can use this on somebody who's in deep anesthesia. And now in hypothermic cardiac arrest, they know that these waves completely disappear. They're gone. They're flat. There is no brain wave activity. They are flatlined. So they've got this documented because they've got her hooked up to this thing. So she was unconscious as much as the medical field was concerned. She says, well, but I wasn't. I was not unconscious. She says she popped out of her body. She was suddenly free of all sense of weight, anxiety, fear. She could move anywhere she wanted by thinking about it. She could tell the doctors didn't know she was out of her body and floating around in the room above them. She didn't relate emotionally to her body. She was happy to be out of it. It was cumbersome. She worried that they were working on the wrong part of her. What she didn't know is they were inserting the catheter into her femoral artery. She's like, hey, the problem's up here. Your femoral artery is in your groin. She felt watched, and she looked over her shoulder and saw a pinpoint of light. And she felt drawn to it. As soon as she saw it, she was sort of inexorably drawn to it. And at the end of it, she saw figures. One of them was her grandmother, but there were many others there that she knew, but she didn't know who they were. And she communicated with them telepathically, and these beings were made of light. Her uncle was there, and he could communicate faster than the speed of light with her telepathically. And she knew that in real life they had a real strong connection, and all he had to do was give her a look, and she knew what he was thinking. And she was asked, is this the light of God? And she says, no, this is what happens when God breathes. That's interesting, I thought. She said there was no physical landscape. There was nothing to describe around them, but beautiful colors. And she said that she couldn't describe the colors because they were not colors she'd seen on Earth. Isn't that odd? They would not let her move into the light at the end of the tunnel. Every being had a sound, and all the tones together were in harmony. Her uncle took her back to her body, and she didn't want to go in, and he pushed her in. And she hit her body at the second defibrillation, and the start of not normal sinus rhythm. So she resisted. He gave her a shove. They shocked her heart at the same time as she hit her body, and her heart started a normal heartbeat. So when she came out of it, she was just like, oh, I can't believe this. And she told the doctors, and they believed her. It confirmed what she saw. They confirmed what she saw during her out-of-body experience. She was able to describe the room and all the equipment in the room, and it had all been covered by that green fabric they use in surgery because they try to keep everything really super sterile. She didn't see any of that. It was all covered up. They also told, if you're going for brain surgery, they cover up the tools because it looks like a mechanics or a carpentry office. There's like saws and stuff. They cover all that up so people don't get freaked out. Also, interestingly, she was able to tell them exactly what everybody said. She should not have been able to hear it because she had headphones on, specialized headphones that were used to monitor her brain activity, and they completely drowned out the sound in the room. So they don't know how she knew. The hypothesis is that the boundary between life and death crosses both ways. So, for example, there was a woman who was dead in the forest for 10 hours in the cold. And it took 6 hours when they found her to resuscitate her. And she was fine. And then, I use this example of children falling into lakes. This happens a lot. Small children, the younger the child, the more likely it is. I think that's interesting, the younger they are. If the water's cold enough and the child is young enough, they can actually be underwater for a substantial amount of time and be rescued and resuscitated. It's pretty dramatic. So they're beginning to think in science, this is scientists speaking, that death is not really a moment, but it's a process, and that it may be reversed even after many hours, depending on the circumstance. So Sam Parma, a member of AWARE, that group we talked about, doesn't use the term near-death experience anymore. He talks about actual death when you're dead. The rest of it is up for grabs. A significant period of time can pass after what we would consider death, and it's usually reversible if the right intervention is given. And the fact that up to 20% of people remember may be due to the fact that they have less swelling in the memory centers of the brain. They just don't know. They're speculating. So Chapter 9, the near-death experience and non-local consciousness. Now this is written by Pim van Lommel, MD, a Dutch cardiologist and an authority on near-death experiences. He believes in the continuity of consciousness after death because of what he's seen in his profession. In 1969, a patient had a near-death experience and that was resuscitated, and doctors had believed this to be completely impossible. And remember, the process of resuscitation is relatively new. It's from about around that time. They just did a 2-year study, and 12 out of 50 patients claimed to have had some sort of near-death experience. A near-death experience is an enhanced consciousness with lucid thoughts, emotions, and memories of the past, visions of the future, all of this occurring outside the body while the body is apparently experiencing death or trauma, and sometimes, rarely, it occurs spontaneously without injury or trauma, surgery, or death. There seems to be an inverse relationship between clarity of consciousness and a loss of brain function. So they did this doctor who is writing about all this did a comprehensive study of 10 Dutch hospitals. They looked at 344 arrests. All these people were clinically dead. 82% had no recollection when they were unconscious, but 18%, so close to your 20%, had some sort of near-death experience, 62 of them. 44, which would be 66%, had a very deep experience. And 21 of them, 34%, had sort of a light near-death experience. So they were followed up 2 and 8 years later, and it was discovered that they had a much lower fear of death. They believed in the reality of an afterlife. All of them claimed that their intuition and their sensitivity and psychic abilities had increased, and that they were all sad that they could not share what they had experienced with other people. There's no physiological explanation for these near-death experiences. It's not the drugs they're on. It's not the type of event. There's no consistency there. That's been thought of. So is it a changing state of consciousness? Are the mind, the consciousness, mind and consciousness able to function independently from the brain? So here we go, 2001. In The Lancet is a British medical journal, and it's like the top of the top. They published this article about this study that this author here of this chapter talks about, and with all these results, and they got tons of positive feedback. But he was also called a quack, and it basically associated the whole topic with alien abduction and parapsychology. Stay tuned. Then 3 more worldwide studies were done and confirmed the data that they had gotten from the first study. And in science, when you can replicate a study and get the same results, that's pretty persuasive. So in all, 4 big studies were done. They all came to exactly the same conclusions. And the 4 studies were by independent groups. They all reached the same conclusion. There were no physiological or psychological explanations for these near-death experiences, which took place during cardiac arrest when the patient had complete loss of brain function. Enhanced consciousness with memories and perceptions from a position outside and above the lifeless body can be experienced during a period of unconsciousness, independently of the brain and body. This conclusion was reached on the basis of compelling evidence that the near-death experience occurs during the period of clinical death and not shortly before or after the cardiac arrest. It was the study's prospective design involving complete medical data that enabled this conclusion. If the cardiac arrest involved a near-death experience with clear perception of the patient's surroundings, such as the doctor's statements or actions with equipment, contents could be verified immediately after the report. Now, some of this is sounding repetitious and familiar because we've covered several books now on this topic, but this is Leslie's major introduction to the whole topic. So Dr. von Lommel, the Dutch cardiologist who wrote this chapter, said, "I've come to the inevitable conclusion that most likely the brain has a facilitating or receiving and not a producing function in the experience of consciousness." It's a transformer, it's a communicator, it's not a creator. So under special circumstances, our enhanced consciousness would not be localized in our brain, nor be limited to the brain. I told you that there are scientific studies out there that have been repeated and repeated with consistent data by different people, starting out as hard-boiled skeptics, and they're shocked at the results they get. And yet the data are repeatable and confirm that this is what they're finding. Now, the conclusions that you can draw from that remains to be seen. But you cannot any longer debate that near-death experiences are illegitimate. They're not. They happen. They can be verified. have been verified. What do they mean? Well, so does consciousness have a biological basis? That's the big question. Based on the universal reported aspects of consciousness experienced during cardiac arrest, we, the doctor here, can surmise that the informational fields of our consciousness, likely consisting of waves, are rooted in an invisible realm beyond time and space called non-locality, and are always present around and through us, permeating our body. Now keep in mind, this is a cardiologist, a research scientist, not a TV psychic or something. This is somebody who's got a whole lot of legitimacy. They become accessible and form our waking consciousness through our functioning brain in the shape of measurable and changing electromagnetic fields. Measurable, that's the key. Our normal waking consciousness has a biological basis because our body is in interface for it. But it is one small part of our larger field of consciousness. Could our brain be compared to the television set, which receives electromagnetic waves and transforms them into image and sound? These waves hold the essence of all information, but are only perceivable by our senses through suitable instruments like the camera and TV. And as soon as the function of the brain has been lost, like turning off the TV, memories and consciousness do still exist, but the reception ability is lost. The connection or the interface is interrupted. Yet consciousness can be experienced during such a period of non-functioning brain, and this is what we call an NDE. So in my concept, consciousness is not physically rooted. So non-local consciousness offers interconnectedness between the living and the dead, potentially. He says compare it to a computer and a cloud interface. The stuff's there, you just need the tool to tune into it. Quantum mechanics actually now supports this notion. Physicists are becoming more and more like alchemists or metaphysicists. As Dr. Bruce Solheim told us, that's been confirmed by other sources. Metaphysics and physics are intersecting, and we're beginning to get a clue. Death is passing from one state of consciousness to another. You can turn off your brain like a TV, but the waves are still there. You don't begin, you don't end. That individual personal thing is still there. According to this doctor, science needs to open its mind. Cute little pun there. Chapter 10. Intermission memories, life between lives. Now we're going to talk about the bardo. Children with past life memories often describe between their lives. A fifth of them remember pre-birth. Dr. Tucker from the University of Virginia calls this intermission memories. They're part of a pattern of stronger memory. There's 3 stages. There's the transitional stage after death. There's the stable stage, which is most of the time between lives. And then the final part is the return stage when you're close to your rebirth. In the first stage, you can watch your own funeral. You might not understand you're dead. You might be freaked out, going from person to person in your life and like, whoa, what's going on? Finally, in the middle there, with luck, if you've given this any thought at all while you're alive, you get contacted by dead relatives and friends, your guides. And this is more like the near-death experience. Some people describe it as going to heaven. And for example, there's a kid, Patrick, who has a past life memory, remembers like between lives. And he had a half-brother who died very young. And it happened 12 years before Patrick was born. When he was born, he had Patrick had his half-brother's limp and the same scars. He claims that before birth, he met a distant relative that was really upset that nobody ever talked about him in this life. And Patrick, after he was able to talk, passed on that message from that interim life period. And this was a person called Billy. Well, it turns out Billy was the child of a great aunt. The details Patrick gave were correct. Billy had been killed by his stepfather 3 years before Patrick's mother was even born. So Patrick never knew him. The murder was never talked about in the family. And when Patrick's mother asked about the nickname Billy the Pirate, the grandmother laughed. That had been his nickname, Billy the Pirate. And there seemed no way that Patrick could know about this because his own mother didn't, and the grandmother never talked about it. So let me skip over this really quickly. Oh, this is actually kind of cute. James, remember the pilot, and Ryan, the movie agent, had return stage transmission memories that were verified by their parents. James was 3.5, and he told his father, Bruce, that he picked him out to be his father. He said, "When I found you and Mommy, I know you would be good to me." And when Bruce asked for more details, James said he found them in Hawaii at a big pink hotel. "I found you on the beach. You were eating dinner at night." 5 weeks before Andrea learned she was pregnant, she and Bruce had stayed at the Royal Hawaiian, a landmark hotel that happens to be pink. On their last night there, they had dinner on the beach under the moon. James had described it perfectly, Bruce says. Neither parent has ever discussed these details with James. And as described previously, James said he met his fellow airmen, who had all been killed before him, when he got to heaven. These were the guys that he named his G.I. Joes after. Ryan also described an incident related to his conception, which his mother recorded early on in her journal and then sent to Dr. Tucker. One evening when she was snuggling with Ryan in front of the TV, he said, "Mommy, why did you think I was going to be a little girl?" Cindy asked, "Who told you that?" Ryan replied that no one did. "I saw it from when I was in heaven. This doctor guy did a test and told you I was a boy, and you got mad and said that he was wrong." Ryan told her that this was on his dad's birthday, and they both went out to eat, and Cindy cried for a long time because she was not going to have a girl. This was absolutely accurate. Of course, there's no way to know whether Ryan might have acquired this information psychically at some point, but he told his mom he saw it before he became part of his new life. In any case, he forgave his mom and told her she was happy that she got a boy instead of a stinking little girl. That's so cute. So, chapter 11, the end of life experiences. And this is with the great Dr. Peter Fenwick, who, by the way, I tried to contact. And, it's really difficult to get hold of a lot of people who have successful publishing careers or are well-known in a field. They kind of insulate themselves with agents and publishers and assistants, and when you go on their website, you can't really email them personally. You email the website, and the manager in some office, runs interference. And I'm sure they hear from people all the time. And the first time you hear from somebody called Irish Granny Tarot, I think the impulse when you're a scientist is to run screaming for the hills. But anyone knows how to get a hold of Dr. Fenwick, let me know. I would love to have him come talk with us. So he's a neuropsychiatrist, famous author of a number of books, Past Lives. No, his other book is turned around. I can't read the back of it. So he believes that in past ages, people believed in an afterlife. They believed in life between deaths. They believed in reincarnation. He kind of stands between the materialistic Western view that death is final and the transcendental view that your brain and mind are separate. So we've talked a lot about this. I'm going to go over it kind of quickly because we've already gone into it in great detail. This is Leslie's introduction to his stuff. We've already done it, so we're a step ahead. So the dying report that they get visits or apparitions from the dead while they're dying, usually relatives, and sometimes caregivers actually see this. The dying, he believes, have deathbed visions. He believes they move in and out of alternative realities, from an area of love and light into the physical reality of being on a deathbed and then back again. Caregivers report seeing strange lights at the death of people. Dying people have premonitions, and in 60% of the cases, there are some of these factors. Clocks stop at the death of a person. Animal behavior gets really weird. A caregiver or people around the body will see a light or a shape leaving the body. They'll see sparks, glows, wisps, smoke in the room. There's another thing called, I didn't write down the name of it, but it's when somebody is not present at the deathbed. They're in another city or whatever. They'll have a sudden realization that a loved one has died. And of the people who have this sudden realization, almost half, 48%, had no idea the person was sick. Sometimes they're in an accident. There will be physical phenomena around the deathbed in the room. Phones will ring. There'll be tapping, rapping, doors banging, pictures falling off the wall. It's just this energy that's going on. And his theory is that this is all stored and happens in another dimension, and we're seeing the physical manifestations. There's a theory of biocentrism, which is that consciousness actually creates the physical world. It's not the physical world that creates our consciousness. So let's read what he has to say about that. That's a pretty heavy-duty concept to wrap your brain around. The great inventor Edison, just hours before his death, emerged from a coma, opened his eyes, looked up, and said, "It's very beautiful over there." And more recently, the sister of Steve Jobs reported that just before he died, Jobs looked over the shoulders of his family members, right past them, and said, "Oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow," and died. So now, how are we doing for time? We're doing okay. We're at part 3, communication from non-local minds. This gets really interesting. Chapter 12, Leslie's first personal experiment. There are arguments for the survival after death, and what we really need are more advances in cognitive neuroscience. They just really need to research this more. Non-local consciousness theories postulate that consciousness is not located in the brain. So this is the notion that it's in the ether. The brain is how we tune it into the physical world. When the brain's dead, it's still there. If you want to work with that theory, how would you test the theory? Discarnate personalities would have to exist somewhere. They'd have to be out there. Is there an opportunity here for an interconnectedness to communicate with them? How would you go about doing that? Is there another realm around us? So these are the sorts of questions that beg to be asked if we're going to talk about this topic in any kind of rational way. So one way to test it is through a mental medium. And in a normal state of consciousness, a medium claims the ability to receive messages from the dead telepathically. People will come to them, called sitters. Think of them as patients or clients. I'm going to say client. It makes it easier to keep track of what's going on when we get into this. So a client will come to a medium and say, "I want to talk to my dead mother." Or, "Is there a message from somebody, anybody, from beyond?" And the medium will try to tune in. And so the medium acts like a telephone operator. I'm going to say she for convenience, but they're both genders. She's sort of like a an operator, telephone operator, or an antenna. The medium doesn't need to know what the message means. And some can even just do it over the phone. The client, the receiver, the sitter, ideally would not react, would not give any feedback. Many mediums, and we're going to talk about the ones you know, I'm not going to say names, but, turn on your TV. Many mediums use what's called cold readings. These are psychological tricks. They use manipulation to get information from the client or the sitter, and it's a feedback loop. It's often used in group sessions. They'll be talking to a big group of people, and they'll say, does the name John mean anything to anybody? And somebody will say, oh, my great uncle's name was John. Oh, your great uncle says he's okay. Let you know he's okay. General statements and fishing for facts that they can play back to people. They use common names. They talk about things with high probability. I'm okay, you don't need to worry about me anymore, that kind of thing. They read the body language. They're good at reading body language and the faces of the people around, and they'll give very generic messages. But if you can set up an experiment using really strict controls, you can eliminate the opportunity for fraud. And this is what they did. They did it over the phone, no visual clues. The sitter was told, say nothing. The medium is a complete stranger to the sitter, knows nothing about who's going to be on the other end of the line in either direction, and they're getting no feedback, no reaction from the sitter. The medium has to provide specific, obscure, and detailed and accurate, verifiably accurate information, or they don't count it. So only a small percentage of mediums can do this, but a small percentage of mediums can do this under controlled conditions. And the conditions have been manufactured so that there's no fraud, no chance of it, no cold readings, no guesswork, no feedback, reassuring the medium that she's on the right track. These are called evidential mediums, and sometimes, because they're providing evidence, and sometimes verifiable facts, even verifiable facts that were unknown to the sitter. So it's not like they're reading the sitter's mind. This is the intriguing part, when they can tell the person X, Y, and Z, which is something that the client, the sitter, had no idea about, and had to go research in the county clerk's office in a different country to verify. And that's the kind of thing that actually happens here. Leslie sought out the most reputable mediums, the best, for a reading. So she went to a place called the Forever Family Foundation, a group of volunteers on Long Island, no comment, who test mediums and support grieving families and research non-local consciousness. So they have a wide umbrella there. Part of the thing is they have a scoring system to test mediums. And after intensive study, if the mediums pass, they get certified, which gives them some cachet in the world of mediumship. Then there's the Windbridge Institute in Tucson. It's a scientific research organization, and it studies phenomena that are currently unexplained within traditional scientific disciplines. Very interesting. So each medium seeking certification there is subjected to an intensive 8-step screening and training procedure, which includes extensive interviews, psychological tests, and 2 blind phone readings, meaning the sitter is not even present on the phone during the reading. This is really interesting. The representative of the institute takes the information and writes it down. The person for whom the medium is reading is not even on the other end of the phone. Fascinating. So Laura Jackson was recommended to Leslie. She's been certified by both places. She got a 90% from one and a 95% from the other. So Leslie set up this elaborate ruse. She contacted Laura using a friend's email and a different name. She meditated in the time between setting the appointment and meeting with Laura because she felt like she wanted to make it as efficient or to work as well as possible. So she meditated to get maximum success. But she wanted to remain a journalist. She didn't want to lose her objectivity. And she just sort of assumed that there might be some, hanky-panky or not to jump to conclusions. And what she decided to focus on when she meditated was Bud Hopkins, who had died. She said her reading was astonishing. It blew her mind. Absolutely blew her mind. Laura said that there was a male, very eager to come speak. And Laura described Bud, including this guy has a nickname like Bub and had many obscure family facts she shouldn't have known. The first message she gave Leslie from Bud was, "You were right." Bud says, "You were right." Leslie says she got chills. She said she and Bud had discussed possible life after death when he was dying. And he rejected the idea 100%. He thought it was nonsense. Here he is. He comes back, and the first thing he says, ostensibly, first thing he says is, "You were right." Then when the medium was asked, "Is there anyone else?" her brother Frank came through the medium. She wasn't expecting this. She was shocked. Laura provided more specific details about her brother. The fact that Gary was the third child in the family. We had a California connection. We lived near each other there in the past. She said my brother was saying there was a photograph of him in his pajamas, which he was smiling about. This was a highly obscure detail and took me a moment to understand. I have a photo of my 3 siblings and me taken on a family vacation when we were children, all of us positioned neatly along a wall, posed for the camera with a gorgeous ocean view behind us. Gary was wearing his pajama top instead of a shirt. I remember our mother being amused by this and commenting on it, and I had a copy of this photo in an envelope along with some others from my brother's childhood. Then Laura said the most powerful statement of all, coming from my brother. He said, "Thank you for keeping his secret." I was taken aback. This involved a private circumstance and related issues involving my brother that no one knows outside the immediate family except possibly a few intimate friends. For years I had kept this secret from the rest of the family at his request until I realized I should no longer do so. This was always a significant and troubling aspect of our relationship throughout our adult lives, but extremely private. At that moment, I have to admit that it felt like this message could only be coming from him. Both personalities, through Laura, their delivery and their focus, Leslie said, were very much as she remembered them in life. She said it was overwhelmingly accurate. And then she tried to find a medium who was completely unknown to Laura. And where did she end up? She ended up going to Ireland. Well, talking to somebody in Ireland. So I'll stop here. We'll start with chapter 13 next time. So this is the end of video 2, and next video will be video 3. And I hope you're enjoying this, and it gets even more bizarro. So hang on, and I'll be back in a minute. Thank you.